Mark Green, and I'm going to talk about data discovery, which is probably a less sexy topic than what we've had so far this morning, but actually is still quite important because as researchers and as analysts, we have to find data and to use data, so we need good tools that can help us find data and make that easier. And particularly we're going to talk about how we've used LLMs as a way to try and help that process. Now, I'm quite fortunate to be stood here today as the person presenting this work, but this isn't just my own project, it's not just me. There is a bigger and wonderful team behind this project, split across universities of Liverpool and Manchester, so myself and Alex Singleton at University of Liverpool, as well as the brilliant team at Manchester, including Richard Kingston, David Topping, Will Halstead, and Caroline Jay. It's a collaboration between quite a lot of groups, including the Geographic Data Service, which is a large UKI investment, and the Digital Solutions Hub as well. And this project was ESRC funded as well. So what I'm going to do in about 15 minutes is I'm going to outline what we did, I'm going to outline how we built our tool. I'm then going to talk a lot about how we evaluated that to work out whether this was a good idea or not. And then we'll have a bit of time for questions. So the vision that we started out with when we started this project was how could we use large language models to try and improve and help researchers discover data sets, hopefully quicker, easier and better comparing to existing tools. Now when we look at research data services, things like the UK Data Service, the way that you work is you log on to that website and there's a search box there and you type in your keywords, and this allows you then, it will bring up a bunch of data sets related to those keywords. And this is usually based on the metadata for data sets. So data sets will have a bunch of keywords attached to them, and hopefully you get the right combination of keywords to match those data sets that you're expecting to find. But this is a little bit clunky. Some systems have slightly more complicated versions than that, but a lot of what we have in research data sets aren't much more complicated. And it requires you as a researcher to know the exact combination of keywords to get to those right data sets. And therefore, if you're not quite confident with using technology, or maybe you've not done this very often, you might not get the right or the best or the most optimal data sets returned to you. What we thought is we could use large language models which have a sort of better semantic understanding of the nuances of language. They have a better capturing the relationships between words, and therefore we could leverage some of those technology and some of the stuff being done and bring those into that same sphere to help researchers get a better search. So moving away from just using keywords to actually giving people the opportunity to type in a full search. And the way we did this, being mindful of some of the limitations of LLMs, was to use the embedding models. We particularly used OpenAI's, but we could use any of them. Using those embedding models that have an idea of the relationships between words, what words mean and how they relate to each other, and using that within the search function. Then taking the metadata for a series of UKI data catalogs, so we used the Consumer Data Research Centre, we used Administrative Data Research, UK Data Service, and Notes and Environmental Data Service. So we brought 4 different data services together into one place. We took the metadata for all the data sets they hosted, and again we converted those metadata into embeddings, which would allow us to match up everything together. We then started to think about how we would design this with users in mind, and I think when I started out with this, the kind of thought that I had was that we'd have a researcher and that they would have some sort of function, and that they would type in the sort of search they want, and the model itself would kind of stream out a bunch of text that would describe the data sets available to them. And this is very similar to how you might have used things like ChatGPT or Copilot themselves. But actually what we ended up with was, when we spoke to people wanted something that was a bit more familiar to them, something that they were kind of used to, something closer to how data services work, or even Google, as it turns out. Most people just use Google to find data sets. So this is what we ended up with, which looks a little bit like, it looks kind of like a traditional search term, but I still think it's quite neat. We have a search box, you can type it in, you can type in free text, you can type in whatever you want, and then it returns a series of results and data sets. It is just information retrieval, so it can't hallucinate, it can't make up data sets, it's just using the embeddings to get a better idea of matching up to metadata sets, metadata, and then returning those that match. We then added in this kind of button that says Ask AI, as we thought that might be quite useful. It's a button that generates a prompt that says, why was this data set returned for the search query that you gave me? And then it gives a kind of generative text output that describes why that data set was relevant. We thought that might help people at least see why certain data sets returned over others. So that's all well and good. We can build tools, but are they any good? So what we wanted to do in the project was also assess whether this was a good idea or not, whether this would actually be useful. And we did that through 3 different approaches. So the first thing we did is we ran focus groups with researchers. We got different types of people who use data. So we had PhD students, we had people from postdocs all the way up to professors in a different one. We had people who run data services themselves. And then we also had a 4th group of local government and 3rd sector analysts. So not academics, but people who might use research data sets. And we ran focus groups and we spoke to them about their views around LLMs and the project and how we might best design our service to meet what they would want to see. And this revealed quite a range of themes coming up. So the first main theme that we found was that people were quite excited about the possibility of LLMs to really improve the experience of finding data. They really like the potential that it could be more of an interactive process, maybe where you can have a continual relationship or a continual chat with an LLM to talk through and refine your ideas, whether that could be built into a search tool itself. They like the idea of combining lots of data sets together, and that this might be slightly better than some of the more clunky data set services out there. And I really like this quote. I guess the benefit of LLM search tools is they can combine many databases of information, so you're not having to search multiple times keywords or multiple times across sort of 6 different databases. You could just do it all at once. And that's really the premise of having federated data services. It's bringing everything into one place rather than, okay, I'm going to check these 4 different websites and see what they've all got and then make a decision. That might save some time. But at the same time, a lot of people were quite skeptical, particularly around a whole range of issues, really relating to trust and trust around LLMs. And even when we explained, well, it's not around hallucination here, it's just information retrieval, really, people were still a little bit skeptical around whether things like hallucinations, whether things could be made up. People were concerned around whether there were biases in how these models were trained, and whether the ways that they're trained might then reciprocate them in terms of data sets returned. People were concerned around things like the environmental impact of generating LLMs, as much as we just talked about in the previous session. And this is a really nice quote from one of the participants. What I would probably do is just ask it the same question multiple times, perhaps wording it slightly different each time, and then see what comes up repeatedly. But I'd still double check it and verify anything that came back before I trusted it. And we sort of prompted with a couple of individuals who had similar views as, well, do you do this when you go on Google and you search for data sets? And it was almost like LLMs were held to a much higher level of scrutiny than maybe how we were traditionally searching for data sets. But the third thing that really came out was that we talked to people was that really just being open and transparent about building these tools is a really good way of building trust. So it's being open about the methods, what you're using, how they work, publishing code openly, publishing reports showing where they work well, where they don't work so well, so that people can understand, okay, it might really work for this idea, but maybe in this situation it's not going to be quite successful. And actually just being open about failure was a good way of building trust. I think just as a researcher, I'd love to know what is out there and who has used it before, just so I can get a sense of what the academic literature has prioritised. People wanted more as well from it. They wanted to be able to summarise how data sets are being used, summarise data dictionaries. They wanted much more than just information retrieval as well, which just gives us a lot of promise for how we think about these tools. The second thing we did was we compared our tool and how it compared to traditional keyword-based searches to see whether they were giving better or, I guess, worse results than what we get from the traditional approaches that they sought to improve on. So some of the things we found that were really good for our approach. What we did is we have the kind of privilege of logging all the search terms on the Consumer Data Research Centre website, now Geographic Data Service. So we took all of the top 200 most common search terms that people were searching for data sets on there. We knew what was returned on the website and we compared that to our LLM just for that data service, so we could have a comparison of real-world search terms. And we found that semantically we were getting the same data sets were being returned from our LLM to what were being put in the keyword search. So at least we were getting kind of similar results at the same time. But there were also some kind of nuances that we didn't expect. One was really around place and location. So if you're a geographer like me, you're really interested in spatial location. If you search for it on a traditional keyword-based website, you search for something like Sheffield, it will only match to any dataset that has Sheffield in its keywords. And actually, most datasets will not match every single place that's located in a dataset. Particularly if you've got some dataset like the census, it captures everywhere. Why would you capture the metadata everywhere that's in it? But actually, our LLM tool had an idea of when it saw the metadata had a kind of sub-geographical data into it, it would then return that and say, this might be useful. And indeed, it would also show data sets of nearby places. So when we search for Sheffield, it would give a data set in the UK data service from Stocksbridge, which is a town just outside Sheffield. My favourite part of this analysis, which is the one I did, was actually what handles really well as spelling errors. So I would take some of the common terms like retail, a really common search on the website, and finding 20 different ways to misspell it, which is quite fun, and it would always return results. And these results would always be quite relevant because it guessed, well, this is probably retail as a word. That would always fail on a keyword search tool. But not everything was great. When we compared like the top search on the top item on a keyword-based search, that was always often different to what was being prompted at the top as an LLM kind of tool search. We also found that our tool gave a lot more data sets returned than a keyword-based search, which could be good if it's returning stuff that a researcher might not know about, but it might also overwhelm people by giving too many options. And we found that it didn't quite so well when you had very vague or very general search terms. So if you just search for census, it doesn't really have an idea, a very good understanding of what that might be, and it doesn't really give many good results back, where at least the keyword search term, you get census data back to. The last part of our evaluation is that we ran a human-computer interaction test, the idea of actually getting people to use both our tool and traditional keyword-based search tools, and essentially randomizing one or the other and asking them to find data sets, and then timing them, asking them questions about how they found that experience, and repeating that process across a lot of people. And this would then give us an idea of, do they actually help people find their data quicker, better, or easier than traditional what's already out there? And, well, we were hoping to have that finished. It isn't finished yet. Our analyses are still ongoing. We've collected all of our data for that. But one thing that's kind of come up is, at least so far, from talking to people, is that people find this kind of LLM way much easier to work with than what traditional keyword search approach was. And I think from when we started doing the focus groups, which was in early 2025 to now, people have just got more familiar, they've got more used to doing it this way, and they want these things. And actually they want much more out of it. They don't just want that search tool as we've kind of given it, is what we developed. What they wanted is they want to be able to ask the tool, okay, how do people write papers using these data sets? And they want that returned as well. They want to be able to say, what variables are in this? Does it have this variable? Can you tell me something about the structure of the data? They want so much more, which is great, but at the same time, it made me feel a little bit like Homer on here. It's like you build something and then suddenly it's no longer relevant anymore because actually everything has moved on. A really nice kind of snippet though from some of our conversations with researchers, and just to paraphrase one of those, They wanted something that was a bit more like a librarian. Talking to a librarian, you could ask them questions, it could come back and return a lot more information. And I think that's the sort of thing we'd like to move towards, apart from the project's finished, so we won't have any fun to do anything now. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening.